Your Olympic hero has arrived. It's true, it's true.
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another Top 10 list. This is actually a follow-up and redo of a Top 10 list I did 4 years ago, and I don't agree with a lot of the assertions I made 4 years ago. As you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about what I consider to be the top 10 best anime of the previous decade, being the 2010s. There may be a few things that have slipped my mind and didn't make this list for one reason or another, and if that happens, I apologize. But this is as best as I could come up with. There are many things that were on the list last time that will not be on the list for a couple of reasons. Number one, I saw some newer stuff after that list was made, obviously, and those things have, taken precedent over those other things because they were better. Another reason is there's a lot of stuff on that first list that I don't agree with anymore. For example, I put Sword Art Online on that list originally. I don't think that should have been anywhere on that list. Sword Art Online is okay at best, and that's when it's, in its best moments. The other one I would say that really didn't belong on that list was Batoom, B-T-O-O-M, the fucking Battle Royale ripoff with gamers thrown in. I don't know why the fuck I liked that so much the first time I watched it, because it's really bad. Admittedly, I still kind of enjoyed it, but, it's really nothing special, and I honestly don't remember any of the characters, so that should say something about it. So before I get into the actual list, I'm going to give a couple of honorable mentions, because I was debating doing a top 20 or a top 10, but I ultimately decided on a top 10 just to do a quick few honorable mentions. Honorable mention number one will be Another. It was on my list last time, and it almost made the list this time. The only reason it's not on is because there's other stuff on the list that have been better than it that I had seen after that. Another one that's off the list for the same reason is Brynhildr in the Darkness. Again, it was also on the previous list. But partially it's not on this list because I saw some things later on that I considered to be better, but also partially because I've kind of reevaluated it and didn't like it quite as much. I still like it quite a bit, and it'd definitely be on this list were it to be a top 20, but it's no longer in my top 10. Another honorable mention I'll give just because of its massive popularity, and the fact that I do think it is pretty good, is My Hero Academia. My Hero Academia would probably not even be on this list, even if it was a top 20, to be perfectly honest. I like it, but I don't love it. I like a lot of the characters, and I like a lot of the story arcs, but the problem with My Hero Academia is it's just kind of a generic battle shonen, and it's very overrated, and I think that the overexposure has definitely lessened my affinity for it. And I would also say, Attack on Titan could have been on this list at one point too, but number one, there was the overexposure. Number two, there were things that were better than it. And number three, the third season was fucking garbage. As with last time, there is some criteria on this list. There's only going to be one entry per franchise, should there have been multiple things in a franchise in the 2010s. In addition to that, I am not going to be including any sequels, prequels, or continuations like that. However, unlike the last list, remakes are fair game. Because they're just basically readaptations of the manga, and I still think that they count very much as a new series since they're not continuing a previous anime. Also, this is about when the anime was made, not when the manga was written. There's going to be some stuff on here that was written in either the 80s, 90s, or 2000s, but the anime was made in the 2010s. Without further ado, I've rambled on quite a bit. Let's get on with it. Number 10, Shiki. Shiki was originally much higher on my list last time. It got pushed back because of some other stuff I added on, and again, my tastes have evolved over time. Shiki did get pushed back to number 10, but it is still very much on this list. Shiki is an excellent series about an isolated village that gets attacked by vampires. The thing about Shiki is it's very creepy for the first half of the series, but the second half of the series makes you sympathize with the vampires, and actually much more of the horror comes from the humans indiscriminately slaughtering the vampires towards the end. Shiki is great. The ending is very scorched earth. There's not a lot of survivors in the ending, I'll straight up say that right now. That's part of what makes it interesting. It's a very good vampire story, and as I've said before, it unruined vampires for me. It made me like vampires again. So, Shiki definitely still belongs on this list. It's a fun, creepy vampire series with a twist in that you sympathize with the vampires by the end of it. And it has a gray area where there's no inherent right or wrong. Like, if it were me, I'd still side with the humans because the vampires inherently need to kill to survive, but on the other hand, the humans are killing them just just because they exist, whereas the vampires are only doing it to survive, with the exception of Megami, who's my favorite of the vampires, even though I hated her as a human. So that's Shiki. Now on to number 9. For number 9, we have Future Diary, which was much higher on the list last time as well, I think. Again, I've reevaluated it, and there's some newer stuff, so it has kind of overtaken it on this list. But Future Diary is really good. Sort of a battle royale type thing, where, like, people are battling to become the next god, and they all have diaries on their phones that can tell the future, but each one has a different function. For instance, the main character's diary only tells about the stuff that happens around him and not about himself, and then Yuno has a diary that only tells her about Yuki, the main character, and nothing else. And then there's one that 12 has that writes about his superhero exploits and only that. So, you know, each diary has its own unique function. There are definitely some things in Future Diary that didn't age as well, in my opinion, with some of the pacing and character motivations, but overall I still think it holds up really well. And I'd still say it's easily my number 9 pick for the 2010s. It also kind of had 2 endings. It had kind of a sad ending originally, but then there was the Redial OVA, which gave it a happier ending that kind of explained the post-credits scene in the original. And without spoiling it, both endings I think have their validity to them. I think I prefer the happier ending, although I do feel like it is kind of a cop-out, so, you know, there definitely is validity to both versions of the ending. Also, Funimation got really fucking greedy and released the series twice, so once without the OVA, then once with the OVA. It's like, motherfucker, if you're gonna release the OVA, why not do it on its own as well? I mean, I get having a bundle that has all of it, but since you already released the fucking series, why not release the OVA on its own too? Granted, I don't buy Funimation anymore, so that doesn't affect me anymore, but, you know, I bought the original series when it first came out without the OVA, and then had to watch the OVA online. Really pissed me off. But anyway, fuck Funimation, so I'm not gonna buy it again anyway, but still. Anyway, that's Future Diary. Great series. Very fun. Number 8, we have Mob Psycho 100. Now, this is from the same guy who made One Punch Man, and I used to not like comedy anime, but this guy has definitely been a key turning point in making me appreciate, you know, comedic anime. Not to mention, it still has really good action in it. The whole point of Mob Psycho is it's about this kid named Mob who has, like, psychic abilities that allow him to fight ghosts. And those psychic abilities grow as the series go on. And the reason it's called Mob Psycho 100 is once he hits 100% of his, like, overcharge, he does what's called an explosion that basically makes his, like, psychic abilities go fucking nuts and, like, do a bunch of damage. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Go Nagai's Susanoo O, which was a manga that's never had an anime. I think it should, but that's a whole other tangent. Although there are definitely some key differences, namely being the tone, the characters, and quite a bit of the setting and things like that are definitely changed. Like, ghosts weren't really the focus of Susanoo, but I do think that there are some similarities that I drew there. But I think Mob Psycho is a great example of balancing comedy and action, and I think that One, the guy who wrote it, does a great job at that. It's a very fun series, lots of weird faces and weird shit that happens, but it's very enjoyable. And speaking of One, we'll move on to number 7 with One Punch Man. One Punch Man was a huge part in making me like comedy anime. I like it just a little bit better than Mob Psycho. I honestly go back and forth between which one I like better between the two, because they're both really great. But whenever people talk about My Hero Academia, I always tell them, you know, One Punch Man is the better superhero anime in my opinion, by far. Because One Punch Man does a good job at subverting expectations, number 1, unlike, you know, Star Wars and things like that completely failed at it. But number 2, it's comedic, and the comedy's fucking great. It makes me laugh every time I watch it, but in addition to that, it's got a great soundtrack, it has great characters, the action is great, the actual drama that's in there is great. It's just a great series. I think One is a great author, and I'm glad that he gets recognition. I have not seen the second season. I've heard very mixed things about that because of animation and such, but I'm still going to give it a shot. Currently, I've only seen the first season, and with Mob Psycho, I've seen a good chunk of the second season, but not all of it. I do plan to continue it as well, though. Anyway, that's One Punch Man. Great series. Fun little stupid superhero action comedy about a guy who kills people in one punch. Number 6, SteinsGate. This is another one that helped me like comedy anime, because SteinsGate is very comedic. I would say it's also dramatic and tragic as well, obviously. The comedy is definitely there. The majority of the series is just them sitting in a room talking about time travel and goofing off. That's like the majority of it. I'd say once you hit about the halfway point, it drastically changes in tone, specifically with episode 11. Episode 11, some stuff happens that sets in motion the real rest of the plot, and it's very interesting. You know, it's about a mad scientist who accidentally invents a time machine, and it uses a lot of real-world time travel stuff, too, meaning, like, real-world, like, conspiracy theories and figureheads. Like, it has John Tidor, who was, like, a famous forum poster who claimed to be from the future. And in addition to that, it also has CERN. They spell it differently, but that's a real organization that many people have all sorts of conspiracy theories about. It uses the old IBM computers, which again is also kind of tied to John Titor and a few other things. So it's very much based on real, like, theories and stuff, and that makes it even more interesting. It's also one of the only series where it's had an otaku character that I've actually liked, because usually I fucking hate otaku characters. I think they're pandering, I think they're cringy, and I think they're bad. But Daru's a really well-written character, and I enjoy his antics, so at the very least they have that. There's definitely some weird shit in it, for sure, but it's definitely enjoyable, and I absolutely love it. Next up we have Tokyo Ghoul, which was on my original list as well, but I think it was also higher up. Tokyo Ghoul is great. It's a series about someone who becomes part ghoul, which, if you don't know what a ghoul is, essentially they eat humans, and they're kind of like enemies of the people that are taken down by this, like, organization who uses their own weapons against them. Tokyo Ghoul deals a lot with the concept of, humanity, what it means to be human, isolation, and having to kill to survive. It's a very interesting series, and I really enjoy it. I thought Season 2 was actually alright, too. I didn't hate it. I thought Season 2 was fine. I actually thought Kaneki had a lot of good development in Season 2, even though he was hardly in it. However, Tokyo Ghoul Re, the first season of Re, which would be the third anime season overall, but it's based off the sequel manga, first season of Re, I hated. I fucking hated it. Like, the one where Kaneki had no memory, and he was part of that group who was hunting ghouls, and there was, like, that gamer girl character that was fucking awful. And then Kaneki, like, becomes a fucking dick at the end and basically tells that one guy that the other character's death was entirely his fault just because he's a fucking asshole. No, I hated the first season of Re. I've watched a little bit of the second season of Re, and I've enjoyed it a little bit more, but I haven't finished it yet. But I fucking hated that first half of Re, where he was just being an asshole to everybody, and there was that gamer girl character that I didn't like. I fucking hated that character, and it was just bad. But at the very least, the first season of Tokyo Ghoul, I think we can all agree, is fucking great. The second season, I will also say, is pretty good. Most people would disagree and say it's bad, but I like the second season quite a bit. Anyway, that's Tokyo Ghoul. Great series. Number 4, Man Wonderland. This was also on the original list. In fact, I think it might have been lower on the list. I think I've made it better on this one. Man Wonderland was also on my top 10 anime of all time list. Surprise, surprise. And I fucking love it. Man Wonderland is the story of this guy named Ganta, whose entire class gets killed by this mysterious man in red named the Wretched Egg. And later on you do find out who the Wretched Egg is, but that's obviously spoiler territory, which we're not going to get into. He gets framed for killing his entire class and gets put in this, like, crazy super prison called Man Wonderland, where death row inmates have to compete in these games where they could die if they lose, and they have, like, this candy that they have to take every 24 hours or else they'll die. And then there's a secret underground arena called the Carnival Corpse, where you fight to the death in this big arena. And the people who fight in the Carnival Corpse are all dead men, and what dead men are is these people who have the power to use their blood as a weapon. The only problem with the anime is it only tells the first half of the story, so they leave out a lot of stuff. There's also entire characters that got cut from the anime adaptation, including the fake dead men, and a very prominent female character that was a friend of Ganta when he met the fake dead men. I don't remember her name, so I apologize for that, but there were certain aspects of that made it into the OVA episode, particularly Crow's backstory. Crow's backstory kind of mirrored one of the manga chapters, but they kind of changed the timeline up a little bit in it. But overall, still a great anime. It definitely does leave you wanting more because it ends on a cliffhanger and kind of pisses you off at the end, I would say. I do feel like it was one of those ones that was like a big promotion to promote the manga, but it's still a very enjoyable series and very underrated in my opinion. But yeah, that's Man Wonderland. This next one is going to be controversial for some stupid-ass reason, because I think people who would find it controversial are just wrong. But number 3 is Cutie Honey Universe. Yes, I put it on here. I don't get why people think it's bad, because it's fucking Cutie Honey. And it's like, people like shit on it for being a remake, but it's like, what the hell did you fucking expect? And they're like, oh, but it doesn't have this, this, or this. It's like, it's still Cutie Honey. In my opinion, it's a better adaptation than the 73 version, even though there are a few things I like better about the 73 version. This one is a little bit more faithful in some regards. There's some weird shit with Panther Zora being kind of this weird deity, mystical figure. That's a bit odd. There's this little reset button-y thing towards the end where some of the dead characters come back to life, and I thought that was kind of dumb, but other than that, the entire series was great. Sister Jill had a hell of a lot of development. She had kind of a complex character arc instead of just being the evil bad girl with the whip. I feel like they actually gave her a fucking personality in this one. Same thing with Tarantula Panther. I feel like they made Tarantula Panther a sympathetic character that you actually care about, as well as Dragon Panther and a few others. So it's like, I don't get why people shit on Cutie Honey Universe. It's a great adaptation of Cutie Honey. It has Naoko in it, which is great. I still think I prefer the Naojiro Hayami from the 70s series, but Naoko is the one that was in the manga. and I definitely think it's great that she was in the anime, and she plays a large role in the anime, too. There's a scene where she saves Honey at one point, which I thought was pretty cool. My biggest concern really was the theme song, which they changed. I didn't like that. But other than that, everything else was great about it. So I honestly don't get why people don't like Cutie Honey Universe. In my opinion, it's the second best Cutie Honey anime. I don't think it holds a candle to New Cutie Honey, but I think it's better than Cutie Honey 1973 and Cutie Honey and all the others. And I haven't seen Cutie Honey Flash, but I doubt I'm going to like that one as much just because it is a shoujo series, technically. But yeah, Cutie Honey Universe is great. And anyone who tells you otherwise, well, in my opinion, is wrong, but hey, check it for yourself. Alright, number 2, we have JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Now, technically, the manga for this started back in 1989, but the anime didn't start until 2011 or 2012. I've seen it stated as both on different sources, so it's either 2011 or 2012 it started, but either way, it's well within that time frame of the 2010s. So JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is one of my favorite animes of all time. It was like number 5 on my top 10 animes of all time. Jotaro is one of my all-time favorite characters. It's my second favorite battle shonen anime, with my first being Fist of the North Star, and this being like a very close second. And in some aspects, I think JoJo can be better than Fist of the North Star, but overall, I do prefer Fist of the North Star. JoJo is the story of the Joestar family throughout the ages as they fight against different enemies, usually tied back to a vampire by the name of Dio Brando. Dio himself is not always the direct enemy, but his influence is felt throughout pretty much every arc of the first 6 arcs of the manga, only 5 of which have been animated, by the way. There are currently 8 parts to the manga, with parts 7 and 8 taking place in a different continuity. However, Dio is still a part of at least part 7, with his alternate universe counterpart Diego Brando being a prominent character. But in addition to that, there is also a brief, like, cameo of Dio when they're talking about, like, stone masks and rock people in part 8. So it's like, Dio is still relevant in the entirety of the series. Basically, it starts... Each different arc takes place during a different time period. For instance, Part 1 takes place in Victorian London. Part 2 takes place in 1930... It takes place in World War II, New York, Mexico, Italy, and a couple other places. Part 3 takes place at first in Japan and then across the entire world, because Part 3, I would say, has the most adventure to it, because they're literally traveling the world. Part 4 takes place in a small Japanese town called Morio. Part 5 takes place predominantly in Italy, with a bunch of mafia stuff. Part 6 takes place in a prison in the US, but has not been animated yet. Part 7 takes place in the Old West, and Part 8, I think, also takes place in the town of Morio, but I haven't really read Part 8. But yeah, that's JoJo. JoJo's great. It follows a different member of the Joestar family for each part, and they each take place in a different time period. Alright, number 1 is Devilman Crybaby. Devilman Crybaby, I don't think is the best adaptation of Devilman. I'm gonna straight up say that. I think the OVAs are a much better adaptation, even though they only got 2 episodes, only concluded the first 2 volumes of the series. It didn't adapt the entire series, which Crybaby was the first thing to do, in fairness. But then, of course, there was also the 1972 Devilman series, which was entirely different and not based on the manga hardly at all. Devilman itself has had a ton of sequels, prequels, reboots, remakes, both in anime and manga form. Predominantly manga, but there's been a few animes. You know, there was, of course, the 1972 series, then there was the OVA trilogy, then, of course, there was a couple of crossover OVAs, Mazinger Z and Cyborg 009. There was also Devilman Lady, the anime, which was actually different from the manga as well. And then there was Devilman Crybaby. And Devilman Crybaby, I have a lot of things I like about it and a lot of things I don't like, but I would still ultimately say it is the best anime of the 2010s, in my opinion, just because of how much of a fan of Devilman I am, and the fact that it was the first one to adapt the entire original series. It does not, however, adapt any of the sequels, reboots, prequels, or any of that. At least not currently. There are rumors and stuff that there could at some point be a second season, but that has currently not happened. Devilman Crybaby made certain character deaths much sadder than they were in the manga, even in my opinion. And again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible, but one of the most prominent character deaths, which involves their head being put on a spike. If you know Devilman, you know whose death I'm talking about. I think Crybaby has the overall best version of that death, but I do think that Crybaby has a lot of issues too. I think it tried too hard to modernize everything. Like, for instance, they turned the Sabbath into, like, a rave sort of thing, which it kind of was dance clubby and stuff originally anyway, but it's like they made it, oh, this is just like something that all the kids are doing, which is like, no, it was a very secretive thing that Rio set up in the original, but whatever. I also am not a fan of the art style. I've said that multiple times, and I know that's a controversial opinion, but I don't fucking care. I think that a lot of the characters look fucking weird. I do think I am somewhat biased, because I am kind of a purist with Guy's style, but I just overall don't like the way a lot of the characters look. They remove some very important character development stuff that happens, particularly with Rio later on in the series. And in fairness, the manga wasn't perfect. Some of the stuff was kind of rushed in that too. But it was overall a good adaptation. I will say that. It was a good adaptation, but it was not the best adaptation. I do think it wins simply because it adapted the entire series and was the first thing to do so, with the exception of that somewhat decent but mostly bad live-action movie. The live-action movie was not great. It wasn't terrible, though. Yeah, Devilman Crybaby. I'm sure none of you were surprised that it was my number one pick, given how much of a Devilman fan I am. But yeah, that is my current list. Obviously, if there was anything I missed, then it didn't make the list. And there were several things that I removed from the previous list that I didn't know what the hell I was either thinking about, or I saw stuff later on that I thought were better. But yeah, that's my list of my top 10 animes of the 2010s. This has been Fugitive Red Eye.
I'm a bit of an elbow man myself, actually. Bit different, bit weird. Not sexual.